Hello everyone and welcome back to part 4 of the Art Attack SuperMod build, where we are building the best Art Attack snowmobile we can. We have a lot of stuff to do this week, so let's dive right in. It's time we start modifying the mainframe to accommodate the new parts. One of the main modifications, and unfortunately one of the most difficult one, is to make some space around the drivers. The tunnel is actually pretty wide from factory, but we can take advantage of it and make an extra wide track without a ton of modifications. The area I have marked in black is the one we need to remove. That feature is there to facilitate the molding process, but we need to take it out now. The two best tools that I have found to make that happen is an oscillating tool and a very sharp bent chisel. You can also use a Dremel. I didn't really have a chisel for this job, so I made one using a pry bar that I sharpened on a belt sander. I also modified the blade on the power tool as it was too wide and had a bad angle for this job. Overall, I think the pry bar did a far better job than the oscillating tool. If you apply a lot of steady force and wiggle it left and right, it will do a nice precise cut. As you can see, I have done one of the two sides and it doesn't leave a perfect finish, but at least no material is in our way now. Next up, to improve the stiffness of the chassis and increase its durability, we need to install a bar on the frame to stiffen up where the engine sits. I've had a frame in the past that cracked and I had to replace it. That's why I recommend that even if you have the electric version of this machine, that you do this modification. In my case, I have to go around the electric start, but a bent straw and 2 tie rods should do the trick. I had to reduce the diameter of the tie rod ends a tiny bit, but it's no big deal if you have a lathe, right? And lastly, we need to extend the tunnel, so we can install a new longer skid in it. The original track and skid looks kinda goofy and takes a lot of power to spin. So we are going to replace all of it. The track, the drivers, and the skid. Unfortunately, in this video, I forgot how to do the mod, so I cut it in the wrong spot. Big oof. I had to go back and re-glue the pieces and then cut the part again in the right spot. Once the epoxy cured, we can finally add a new tunnel piece to it. You then take a drill bit and you drill the 4 holes that will fasten the new part to the tunnel. I use a 7/64 drill bit, but you could use a 3/32 bit, followed by a M3 tap. I might come back later and make the holes bigger so I can put some brass inserts in it. 4 M3x8 screws later, it's time to test fit the frame on the belly pan. One of the large front screws needs to be longer because we added the brace to it. Lucky for me, I had one the perfect length in my bag of loose screws. In the video, I'm putting thread locker on the nut, but I am aware that we might have to take it on and off a couple times before the final assembly. I then drilled the holes in the frame for the trailing arms and put a long M3 screw, washer, and nylon nut to hold it in. Here are the stainless steel trailing arms I teased in the previous video. I am unfortunately not entirely convinced of the look of these, so I decided not to install them yet. But maybe once we have decided of our theme and the color scheme, we might put them back on. Then the last modifications on the frame we can do is add the half moon shaped printed piece to cover the old exhaust muffler hole. As you can see, we've got something very special that just showed up in the mail. I recently asked in the community tab what you guys thought this package was. I hinted that it was something for this machine that I think has never been done before. I was lucky enough to have been reached out from JLCPCB a few months ago, and they asked me if I could, with their help, make something awesome. And I know what you're thinking, and this is not a sellout channel. I don't accept sponsorship for products you guys don't need. But dude, you do need that. You don't have a metal 3D printer. I don't? Oh, yeah, well, sorry. So Joanna, the salesperson, talked to me about the services she had, and I did order PCB from their website a few years ago for the G4, so I was kind of familiar with it. We discussed back and forth and she was very helpful, but most importantly, very human. I didn't feel force or pressure and I really appreciate that. So me and her talked about what could be the coolest freaking thing we could put inside of a remote control snowmobile that's difficult to make normally, and that would be just incredible, and that's never been done before. So we decided we were gonna make a freaking expansion pipe for a nitro little engine. Oh yeah. And she was in. Now all I had to do was design it. Easier said than done. So there's a lot of science and research that goes into making those little expansion pipes. Making one that makes peak performance is extremely difficult. Lucky for me, there's plenty of videos online to explain how to build one. I also had a few pipes here that I could take measurements of, so I know I'm not too far off. So brace yourself as it's about to get real technical. So I started on AutoCAD with a flat pipe. I put in a couple of measurements, and once I was satisfied, it was time to make it 3D. You can measure the distance from the port to tell you what the diameter of the pipe should be at what point. But the main problem showed its face. The pipe needs to fit inside the body. With the space I have allowed inside the snowmobile, I don't have a ton of options. I used the loft function in AutoCAD to make the shapes I need. I decided to do multiple small sections, so if I need to rotate one or the other to make some space, it's easier than one large piece. Once the rough outline was done, I exploded the part into its component objects. You end up with a bunch of surfaces, then you can use the thicken function to convert a surface into a 3D solid with a specified thickness. I must have made 10 or so tests before I had a pipe that looked good and fitted inside the body. To try to keep the weight down, I wanted a thin shell with an external webbing to add some strength. The first one has triangle webbing. I'm using Mesh Mixer for this. I basically exported a smooth pipe and had the software explode every edges about 1 millimeter. I then fused the skeletonized version of this with the smooth one to get this look. It's a bit sketchy, but it works. I did the same thing with the second pipe, but this one with the pattern type dual edges, which ended up making hexagon-like shapes. The hex one is a bit lighter, maybe 5 or 10% lighter, but it had a really weird organic look, and I wasn't sure how that would have turned out in person. The engineers at JLCPCB were not too sure about that design, as it's very thin. So I went back in there and made the pipe thicker and smooth again. This ended up being 50 grams heavier, but at least I know this will work well. I then exported the STL to JLCPCB, and 2 weeks later, this beautiful box showed up. The part is surprisingly smooth both inside and outside. I had to split it in 2 pieces as they needed some support inside and would not have been able to remove them otherwise. It looks really clean inside, and I think the pipe will perform well. I was worried that the part might warp during the build process, so I added extra pieces to stabilize the part. Before I reattach the 2 halves together, I need to remove those. This time, let's get the Dremel out. I took my time and I made sure that everything was perfect and as smooth as possible on the inside to give me the highest chance of having a high performance pipe. It looked really good once I was done. I chose to go with a professional welder to remill the 2 halves together, as I thought this material might be porous and would have behaved weirdly compared to regular stainless steel. So I went to my friend Dave to fuse these 2 parts together. He said the part felt like regular stainless steel, so it wasn't too difficult to pull it off. Now the question I'm asking myself is, should I go with a special coating on it, such as ceramic coating, or should I have it bare like this? Maybe a chrome coating? What about high heat paint? I'll think about it. I want to thank Joanna and her team for their help, as this would not have been possible without them. If you want to support them as they have supported me, you can use the affiliate link in the description. When you use the link to order, I get a little kickback. I've also put the link for coupon codes down in there, but don't tell anyone. Now with all that being said, let's go back to the build. So we ended up at 293 grams. The original Savage pipe is 90 grams, the original Art Attack pipe is 95 grams, and the huge nitro bolt pipe I have here is 101 grams. So needless to say, we gained some weight here, and I don't think it's going to be much of a problem as the overall sled will likely be lighter than a fully electric brushless snowmobile. The pipe seems to really blend in with the rest of the sled. It takes very little space and will allow us to work on the rest of the system without it being in the way. Next step, let's work on the fuel tank. I thought about it long and wide, and although there was some simpler solution, I probably ended up with the most difficult one. I wanted a fuel tank that had a filler neck at the top so you can easily fill it up without having an external pump. But all the fuel tanks that I saw were either not in the right shape or had a pivot cap on it instead of a screw-in cap. So once again I decided I was gonna make my own, because for some reason I like to make my own life difficult. I considered having a little 2-ounce metal flask that I could weld to another little fuel tank or another flask, but then it dawned on me that you wouldn't be able to easily see the fuel in it. So I went back to a traditional Sullivan fuel tank. But I still want the fuel cap. So I machined down a little AAA battery flashlight and added a plastic top to it. I then designed the most complex part I have ever machined on a lathe that would plunge inside the fuel tank and seal it from underneath. It would also have all the nipples that would come out of that part. And then I immediately regretted it and scrapped the entire idea. Why am I making my life so incredibly difficult for seemingly no reason? I decided to simply have one filler neck go through that silicone seal and have 2 additional nipples all the way to the bottom of the tank for the fuel and the pressure. But then I still needed 2 new nipples with a barb on both sides, and as far as I could see, that didn't exist. Sullivan makes one, but it only has 1 barb, so I had to once again machine one on the lathe. They came out nice though. I then got Tygon tubing and sliced 2 small discs that would be used to seal against the tank.
I then did the exact same thing for the vent tube.
Next up, the filler neck. I enlarged a hole in it and made an inside nut that pushes against the plastic tank. I then machined yet another part that screws into it, and I will weld the flashlight core to it.
Welding those 2 pieces together was not easy as both of them are very thin.
And with that part finally welded, we finally have everything we need to fully assemble that fuel tank. That came out nice. All there's going to be left to do is blend the tank into the rest of the seat, install it, and then we'll have a complete fuel system. But that's going to be for the next video. I feel like we've accomplished quite a bit of work today, so I will see you in the next part. Thanks everyone for watching. Take a look at the links down in the video description, and thanks for riding with me.